Her granddaughter gave away her dog while she slept. Helen Granger, 72, didn't scream. She stood. By the end of the week, Brianna and Kyle would be gone, legally erased from her home. Muffin, the terrier they called a burden, was back at her feet, tail wagging. They thought age made her weak. They forgot who owned the keys, the deed, and the will. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The silence wasn't peaceful. It sat heavy in the room like smoke after something burned. Helen opened her eyes to the sound of nothing, no soft patting across the hardwood, no familiar snuffle of a wet nose checking if she'd stirred. The late afternoon light cut through the blinds, casting long golden stripes across the floor where Muffin usually curled. But the spot was empty. She sat up too fast and immediately felt the pull in her right shoulder. Years of tending garden and arthritis made sure of that. She blinked against the sting in her eyes, calling softly, "Muffin." Nothing answered. Not even the telltale tap of nails on tile. Barefoot and disoriented, Helen shuffled to the hallway, hand bracing against the wall for balance. The silence grew louder with each step. The house, though modest, had never felt so cavernous. A scent lingered near the back door, chemical faintly citrus. The mop bucket was still damp. Kyle's idea of cleaning probably, which usually meant he spilled something and didn't want to admit it. Helen rounded the corner into the kitchen and stopped cold. Brianna sat at the table, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. Kyle leaned back in the other chair, picking at something in his teeth. Neither looked up. "Where's Muffin?" Helen asked, voice sharp with panic she hadn't expected. Brianna flinched, then forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "She's fine." Helen stepped forward, feeling heat rise up her chest. "What do you mean fine? Where is she?" Kyle shrugged, not even bothering to stand. "We did what was best." "What does that mean?" Helen's voice cracked on the last word. Brianna finally met her eyes. "She was 13, Nana. Old, uncomfortable. You were sleeping half the day. She needed a home where people could take care of her properly." Helen's breath hitched. She gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. "You gave away my dog." Kyle rolled his eyes. "She was dirty, loud. It was constant barking. Couldn't even control her bladder." Helen looked between them, waiting for one of them to smirk, to say it was a joke. Neither did. "I was asleep," she whispered, horror beginning to calcify into something darker. "You did this while I was asleep." Brianna stood up and opened the fridge, as if the conversation had ended. "You always said Muffin was your responsibility. We just helped you do the hard part." Helen's knees nearly gave. She backed out of the kitchen in stunned silence, the hallway tilting like a slow-motion fall. The place where Muffin's bed had been was cleared. No bowl, no leash on the hook, as if she had never existed. The tears came without her permission. She sat on the edge of her bed and let them come, fists balled into the blanket. Each sob carved out her chest like a dull chisel. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the erasure. They had wiped Muffin away like a stain on the counter. The knock on the front door was light but firm. Helen didn't move. A few seconds later the door creaked open. "Helen," came the familiar voice, low and cautious. "Trish." Helen turned away, embarrassed by the state she was in, but Trish was already beside her, hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "I heard." Trish paused. "Heard you crying through the fence. Thought maybe the dog." "She's gone." Helen's voice was hoarse. "They took her." Trish didn't ask questions. She just sat down steady as a tree. "That dog was your heart." Helen wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. Her voice, though trembling, had steel behind it. "So is this house." Trish looked at her carefully. "You still own it." Helen nodded. Slowly, deliberately she stood. Her joints cracked, but she didn't falter. She walked to the closet in the back hallway, reached above the coat rack, and pulled down a small key box. From it she retrieved a worn key, then moved to the hallway's linen closet and unlocked the built-in wall safe. She knelt, bracing herself on one side, and pulled out a thick red folder labeled in bold black marker "Property Rights." In case of war, her hands didn't shake as she opened it. Just her eyes, which gleamed sharper than they had in years. The parking lot of the first shelter reeked of ammonia and hopelessness. Helen stepped out of her car and into a wind that carried the sound of dogs barking, short, panicked bursts that clashed like broken dishes. Her cardigan flapped behind her, and her fingers curled tighter around the file folder she'd brought from home, though she didn't know why. She wasn't here to argue yet. She was here to find her dog. Inside, the receptionist gave her a tired smile. "Can I help you?" Helen nodded once. "I'm looking for a dog. Terrier mix, small, gray around the muzzle. Her name is Muffin." The woman typed something into her computer, her nails clacking with every keystroke. "Do you have an intake number?" "I wasn't the one who brought her here," Helen said, "but someone in my family might have." That sentence left a bitter taste in her mouth. She pressed her lips together until the woman looked up, apologetic. "Sorry, ma'am, no Muffin in our system this week. Maybe try the city kennel." That was stop number 2. Then 3. Then 4. Each place offered the same polite indifference, the same look of vague concern, that never crossed the border into action. At the last location, a concrete gray municipal facility nestled between a scrapyard and an empty school, she almost didn't go in. Her knees hurt, her chest ached, but something deeper than pain kept her upright. Hope was a kind of war drum now. Inside, the air was stale and metallic, thick with bleach and nervous barking. A young man at the front desk barely glanced up from his clipboard. Helen placed both hands on the counter. "I'm looking for a dog. My dog. Taken without my consent." He raised an eyebrow. "What's the name?" "Muffin." He started typing. She watched his face for the flicker, something that said her search wasn't for nothing. Then it came, "Terrier mix? Surrendered 3 days ago?" Her throat tightened. "Yes, that's her. She's in kennel 4. But you'll want to see this." He turned the screen so she could read the intake form. "Owner surrender, Brianna Lawson." Helen stared at the name as if it were a stranger's. Her granddaughter had signed her name on the lie. She pressed her ID against the glass. "She's not Brianna's dog. She's mine. Check the microchip." He nodded, disappearing down a hallway. Moments later, a low, familiar bark rose in the distance. Helen turned toward it just in time to see Muffin being led through a side door, her gait slower, but her eyes alive the second they landed on Helen. "Muffin," she breathed, kneeling without hesitation. The little dog's whine split into something between a sob and a yelp as she jumped into Helen's arms. Her body trembled under Helen's fingers, but her tail wagged with stubborn relief. "She was going downhill when she got here," the young man said, softening. "But she perked up fast today. Happens more than you'd believe. Family brings them in behind someone's back. We're not supposed to say it, but happens all the time." Helen didn't answer. She wrapped Muffin in the fleece blanket she'd kept in the car for years, cradled her like a child, and walked out without another word. Back home, the front door creaked open like a held breath. Brianna was folding laundry on the couch. Kyle scrolled through his phone. Both froze as Helen stepped inside. Muffin let out a quiet bark. Brianna blinked. "You actually went and got her?" Helen didn't flinch. "She's mine. She was never yours to take." Brianna crossed her arms. "You're making this dramatic." Helen's voice sliced clean. "You haven't seen drama." She walked past them like ghosts. Into her bedroom, closed the door, laid Muffin down on her quilt, one hand resting over the old dog's heartbeat. Her breath steadied. Later that night, Helen pulled open the drawer where she kept old church bulletins. Tucked between one from Easter and a flyer about potlucks was a folded card. "Carla Pena, Elder Property Rights and Estate Law." She dialed the number. 2 rings. A calm, clear voice answered. "Mrs. Granger. You ready to make some decisions?" They called her lucky. At the pharmacy, the post office, even the woman who clipped her hair in a rented corner of the Safeway, said at once, "Paid off house in Boise? At your age? That's a blessing." Helen never corrected them, But luck had nothing to do with it. It was late nights budgeting on scratch paper, 2 decades at a school front desk, and 31 winters without David. Now the so-called lucky house had become occupied territory. Carla Peña's office was on the second floor of a brick building near the courthouse. No nonsense, no elevator music, just clean lines and straight answers. Helen sat across from her in a soft leather chair that creaked every time she shifted, a manila folder heavy in her lap. Muffin rested beneath Carla's desk, chin between her paws, tail twitching slightly with each voice inflection like she was listening for subtext. Carla flipped through the documents methodically. Teed tax records, utility bills all in Helen's name, nothing co-signed, no shared tenancy agreements. Carla's reading glasses slid lower as she turned each page. "You've got full title," Carla said at last. "Fee simple, absolute, no life estate carve-outs, no tenancy agreements on file." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but her eyes sharp and still lingered. "Have they ever paid rent?" Helen shook her head. "Not a dime. It started as a few months. That was 3 years ago." Carla sat back. "And I assume they've never had a lease?" "No. But," Helen opened a second folder, thinner but just as damning. "Brianna used my address to register some kind of LLC last month. I found a confirmation letter in the mail with her name on it. Never asked." Carla took the letter and skimmed, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Using your home address for business without your consent can be grounds for immediate termination of occupancy, especially in elder residence cases. They're attempting to establish a kind of squatter's legitimacy. Paper trails like this are their first flag." Helen's jaw tightened. "Well, let's remind them whose land this is." Carla gave a small nod of approval. "We will. First step, update your homeowner's insurance, notify the county and record an affidavit of sole ownership. We'll also start a written timeline of events, every incident, every overreach. I'll notarize it when you're ready." Helen opened her planner. "I've already written most of it down. What they said, what they moved." Carla smiled. "Good. We'll use it." The office buzzed with the hum of fluorescent lighting. Outside, traffic murmured past, but inside it felt still, like strategy taking form. Helen knelt and reached down to scratch Muffin behind the ears. The dog leaned in, finally relaxed. "You brought her home," Carla observed. Helen's voice was low but resolute. "And I'll keep her here." They spent another 40 minutes in careful review, county deed reaffirmation, insurance policy confirmation, local tenancy ordinances for Ada County. Carla explained every legal step with surgical calm, highlighting the points of no return. Helen signed where needed. Each signature steadied her. Her hand, her spine, her voice, everything felt just a bit stronger with each mark. Carla clicked her pen shut and glanced at her calendar. 5 days. Helen looked up. "That's when they'll get the notice of termination," Carla said. "Formal, enforceable, and with grounds tied to elder abuse statutes should we need them." Helen closed her folder and set it on the edge of the desk. 5 days, she repeated. Carla leaned forward slightly. "You want quiet or loud?" Muffin lifted her head. Ears perked. Helen smiled, just slightly. The kind of smile that didn't say yes or no, only not yet. The refrigerator door hung open, humming with a hollow sort of emptiness. Helen stood there, staring at the bare shelves like they might apologize. No eggs, no sliced turkey, not even her jar of apricot jam. The labeled container of Muffin's chicken and rice, gone too. Her hands tightened on the refrigerator handle until her knuckles ached. She shut it quietly, walked to the pantry, and found it ransacked just the same. A half box of saltines. A can of beets. Nothing else. The kitchen smelled faintly of grease and garlic. Someone had reheated leftovers, probably hers. Looking for something? Kyle leaned against the hallway doorframe, holding a sports drink in one hand, the other buried in his hoodie pocket. He smirked, eyes flicking down to her as if she were the punchline to a joke he hadn't bothered to tell. "Groceries are missing," Helen said evenly. Kyle shrugged. "You keep putting your name on things like it's a dorm fridge. We live here too." "No," she corrected, without raising her voice. "You stay here, rent-free, on my kindness." Kyle chuckled, low and dismissive. Sure, and I guess Muffin paid utilities too? He turned and walked into the living room, trailing smug silence behind him. Helen didn't respond. She walked calmly to the sink, opened the cabinet beneath, and pulled out a lidded plastic tub from behind the cleaning supplies. She set it gently on the counter, and peeled back the lid to reveal individually bagged portions of Muffin's food: cooked chicken, peas, rice. Each bag dated, each one sealed in freezer-safe plastic. She'd started storing them there after the last time Muffin went without dinner because someone forgot. She filled the ceramic bowl, set it beside Muffin's corner cushion, and watched as the old terrier limped forward, tail twitching with quiet trust. Helen stroked the dog's back while she ate. Behind her, the sound of cardboard ripping made her turn. Kyle had tossed an empty pizza box, half greasy, half crumpled, onto her favorite armchair, the one with the plaid cushion and embroidery she'd done after David passed. He didn't look up. She didn't flinch, didn't touch it, just returned to the counter, unwrapped 2 slices of bread from her bread box stash, and made herself a sandwich. 1 slice of cheddar, mustard, tomato. Nothing fancy. Enough. She ate at the counter, facing the window, where the winter light turned the neighborhood silver and bare. Outside, a crow perched on the fence. Inside, she heard Kyle flipping through TV channels like a slot machine he was determined to lose. Muffin finished eating and curled up again, belly full for the first time in days. There was a knock. 2 short taps. Helen wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door to Trish, bundled in a gray wool coat, a folder in hand. Got it notarized, Trish said, lifting the folder. The whole timeline, dates, names, everything Carla asked for. Helen opened the door wider. Come in. Trish stepped over the threshold, her eyes landing on the pizza box, the echo of the TV, the empty fridge still slightly. She didn't say a word, just handed Helen the folder. Helen tucked it beneath her arm. They haven't seen the door swing yet. Trish's gaze sharpened. Just don't blink when it does. The kitchen light buzzed faintly overhead. Helen walked to her laptop and opened it. 1 new email. From Carla Peña, subject draft. Notice of termination. She opened it, read it twice. It was airtight, clean, legal. Everything lined up like Carla said it would. At the bottom, 1 blue button. Approve for service. Helen clicked. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Thicker than standard printer stock. Like they wanted it to feel official. Helen held it up to the lamp in her bedroom, watching the watermark glint faintly like it had something to prove. Residential lease agreement. 36-month term. Signed Kyle Thorne, Brianna Lawson. Her name wasn't anywhere on it. Not as landlord. Not as witness. Just the address, hers typed in bold above the fabricated dates. The lie sat in her palm like something diseased. She laid it down on her desk, pulled the rest of the stack from the envelope she'd found shoved behind the kitchen cookbooks last night. Cable bills rerouted to Kyle's name. A hand-typed payment ledger, noting fake rent transfers that had never hit her account. Even a printout of Idaho landlord-tenant laws, highlighted and underlined like they were studying for war. Helen didn't flinch. She gathered them all, every page of their false claim, and walked to the hallway closet where her shredder waited. She plugged it in. The machine whirred to life with a mechanical purr, like it knew what was coming. She fed the fake loop, the blades caught, and the sheet vanished in a satisfying hiss of paper death. Then the bills. The ledger. One by one, piece by piece, she offered their inventions to the teeth. Upstairs, something thumped, a chair leg scraping tile, Kyle's voice echoing faintly through the floorboards. Helen didn't pause. When she finished, she unplugged the shredder and returned to her room. She slipped the still warm scraps into a trash bag, tied it tight, and carried it out to the bin. As she walked, wind stirred the evergreens beside the porch, their needles whispering like co-conspirators. Later that afternoon, Carla's voice came steady through the speakerphone as Helen sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand. They've got nothing, Carla confirmed. No legitimate lease, no rental payments, no contract, verbal or written with your consent, and the attempt to fabricate those documents, especially using your home address without permission, gives us the grounds we need. Helen signed the complaint. Carla walked her through each line. Property misuse, elder coercion, false tenancy documentation. Once filed, Carla added, "We're requesting immediate eviction under Idaho's elder protection statutes, fast track eligible." Trish arrived just as Helen was faxing the documents. She stepped inside, took one look at Helen's face, and said, "You walk like you're 40 again." Helen cracked the barest smile. "Because I'm walking toward freedom." They both stood in silence for a moment. Muffin nestled at Helen's feet, chewing gently on a soft toy Trish had brought her. Upstairs, the floor creaked. A minute later, Kyle stomped down the stairs, a sheaf of shredded paper clutched in his fist, like it had wronged him personally. His cheeks were flushed red, breath shallow. "What the hell is this?" he snapped, holding the mangled remains aloft. "That was our lease." "No," Helen said without looking up. "That was your fiction." Kyle's mouth opened, but before he could speak again, Helen turned to face him fully. "If you have legal counsel," she said, "you're welcome to contact them." Brianna appeared behind him, her phone in her hand, screen glowing. "Are you serious right now? You're actually trying to throw us out?" "You already threw out what mattered to me," Helen replied. "The rest is cleanup." Kyle's voice went up a notch. "We'll take this to court." Helen turned back to her tea. "We already are." The front doorbell rang. Helen crossed the room and opened it. No hesitation. A delivery courier handed her a certified mail envelope. She signed, opened it on the spot. Inside, a stamped copy of the filed complaint, signed by a county clerk. The last page bore Carla's note, scribbled in ink beneath the signature line. "Sheriff's Department scheduled for a 72-hour warning. Clock starts now." Clock starts now. Helen folded the letter slowly, as if each crease was a boundary being redrawn. Behind her, Kyle's voice cracked. "You can't actually do this." But Helen wasn't listening anymore. Helen stood at the threshold of her own kitchen like it was a war front reclaimed. Her fingers curled around the folded eviction notice, the county seal stamped in dark blue ink. Behind her, the morning sun poured through the east windows, illuminating dust motes and truths. Brianna sat cross-legged on the countertop, eating cereal straight from the box. Kyle leaned in front of the open fridge, one foot propped on the door, sipping orange juice from the carton. They moved through her space like squatters crowned with entitlement, as if the house had molded itself around their chaos. Helen walked forward without a word. The wooden floor creaked under her bare feet. The fridge door clicked shut behind Kyle as she passed him. She unfolded the document, smoothed the top edge with care, and used a magnet shaped like a strawberry to post it dead center on the fridge. 72-hour notice to vacate. Official service filed. Ada County Courthouse reason. Unauthorized occupancy. Elder coercion. False documentation. The sound of cereal crunching stopped. The carton hit the counter harder than it needed to. "What the hell is this?" Kyle barked. Brianna dropped her spoon into the box, milk splattering across the granite counter. Helen turned slowly. Her voice was calm, like she was reciting from memory. "It's the start of your exit. You've got 3 days. Legally served." Clock's ticking. Kyle stepped forward and yanked the paper off the fridge. He crumpled it and tossed it toward the sink. "We live here. You can't just boot us like we're—" "You never lived here," Helen said. "You lingered." Kyle's mouth twitched, grasping for some version of authority he never had. "This isn't over." Helen pulled a second copy from the front pocket of her sweater, unfolded it, and pinned it back up with the same strawberry magnet. That one was for practice. Brianna slid down from the counter, jaw tight, arms crossed. "You let us in. Remember? You said this house would always be open. I said it would be open when you needed help. That was 3 years ago. You needed a hand. Now you've taken the whole wrist." Brianna stepped closer. "You're being manipulated. That lawyer, what's her name? Carla? She's feeding you this garbage so she can get a cut when you drop dead and sell the house. Helen didn't blink. You think everything is a hustle because that's how you live. Carla gets nothing. The house is already in a trust. You're not in it. Brianna's eyes narrowed. You'll die alone, Nana. Helen paused, and when she spoke the words carried weight, not spite but certainty. Then I'll die proud. And clean. From her corner cushion near the heater vent, Muffin lifted her head, and barked. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was full, present, the kind of bark that carried recognition. She stood tail wagging, and walked to Helen's feet, as if taking position. Kyle scoffed. Perfect. You've got your little mutt back, and now you think you're queen of the castle again. Helen glanced down, gave Muffin a slow pet between her ears. I never stopped being queen. I just let the wrong people stay in the castle. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A new text from Trish. Trish, locksmith confirmed for Saturday morning. You still good? Helen typed a single reply. Me ready. She looked up to find Kyle now at the table, tapping furiously at his phone. Squatter laws. Idaho, he muttered, scrolling. There's gotta be something. 30 days. Implied tenancy. His face fell. He clicked another link, then another. His shoulders sagged. Brianna peered over his shoulder. What? What's it say? Kyle didn't answer at first. Then finally, with teeth gritted, no protections. Helen walked to the sink, rinsed her hands, dried them on a towel, and looked out the window. The winter sky was pale and cloudless. The air inside was tight, but the storm had started to clear in her. The morning air bit with the kind of chill that made your bones remember you were alive. Frost dusted the porch railings like powdered sugar, and Helen's breath came out in visible puffs as she pulled her sweater tighter across her shoulders. She stood on the front steps with a mug of black coffee in one hand, watching the curb like a sentry. At exactly 9:02 a.m., Trish's beige Subaru pulled into the driveway. A second vehicle, a dented white van with Reed's 24-hour locksmith in hand-painted block letters, followed close behind. Helen stepped down the walkway. As the locksmith emerged, young and lanky with dark circles under his eyes, he held a small toolbox and nodded with polite curiosity. You sure about this? He asked gently, more out of habit than doubt. Trish answered before Helen could. She owns the home. Paperwork's airtight. Helen raised her phone, already on speaker. Carla's voice came through, crisp and firm. This is Carla Pena. I'm the attorney of record for Helen Granger. She's the legal and sole owner of the residence. No tenancy agreement exists with current occupants. Proceeding with a lawful lock change is fully within her rights under Idaho Eviction Code. The locksmith nodded. Say no more. Trish handed Helen a paper bag. Inside 2 new sets of keys, just picked up from the hardware store that morning. Helen turned them over in her palm, cold, silver, final. As the locksmith unscrewed the doorknob, each click of the metal was a closing door somewhere else. Helen listened to the familiar sound of an old lock surrendering to fresh teeth, to steel replacing complacency. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The front door swung open. The locksmith slid the old knob into a plastic bag and replaced it with a polished brass one. The door closed again. Same frame, new rules. He handed Helen the new key. She slipped it onto a ring that already held her mailbox key, her shed key, and a tiny bronze tag shaped like a dog bone that read Muffin, if found I'm home. Trish signed the receipt and gave Helen a look sharp enough to cut glass. They won't see it coming. I hope they do, Helen said. I want them to know this is the last door they'll ever try to own. At 11:34 a.m., the sound of tires on gravel crunched up the driveway. Brianna's SUV jerked to a stop. She stepped out with a coffee in one hand, shopping bags in the other. Her boots clicked against the walk as she reached the porch. Then she stopped. She inserted her key. Nothing. She tried again. Twisting harder. Click. No give. Mom, what the hell? She shouted, voice slicing through the quiet street. Helen stood just inside the door. She opened it slowly, Muffin at her feet. "You're still inside?" Helen asked. 3 hours to go. Brianna stared at her. "You changed the locks." "I changed the direction," Helen replied. Brianna shoved the key back into her purse and stormed inside when Helen stepped aside. Kyle appeared from the living room in wrinkled pajama pants, holding his phone. "This is harassment," he said. "You can't just lock people out. You don't even have a sheriff's order yet." Helen didn't raise her voice. "You're not locked out. You're just not on the lease, because there isn't one," Muffin growled, a low warning note that started in her chest and curled into the room like smoke. She stood at Helen's heel, posture square and unflinching. Kyle flinched. "That dog has problems." "No," Helen said, walking toward the kitchen. "She has memory." She grabbed a clean bowl from the cupboard, filled it with food and stepped out onto the porch. Muffin followed, tail flicking confidently behind her. Helen sat on the steps, letting Muffin eat beside her in the sunlight, while the cold edged the corners of the concrete. Behind her, raised voices echoed inside. She didn't look back. Her phone buzzed. "Caller ID, Ada County Sheriff," she answered. "Mrs. Granger," came the deputy's voice. "We're scheduled for this afternoon. Want us there early or on time?" Helen wore gloves. Not because the items were dirty, though many were carelessly treated, but because she wanted no trace of them on her skin. She opened the first closet and pulled out a hoodie of Kyle's, balled in the corner under a pile of socks, a vape pen still nestled in the front pouch. She folded it without flinching, and placed it into a cardboard box marked in neat handwriting. "Kyle, bedroom, 1 of 3. The boxes had been prepared the night before. Trish had brought them, flat packed and discreet. Helen had assembled each one methodically, the way she used to wrap Christmas gifts, corners square, tape clean, writing legible. The sound of packing tape stretching and snapping filled the house like a metronome. In the bathroom she found Brianna's curling iron still plugged in, its cord dangling over the sink. Mascara tubes, half-used lotions, a single silver hoop earring. All of it went into a box labeled Brianna. Bathroom, 1 of 2. She did not leave notes. They hadn't left one for her when they'd taken Muffin. No apology taped to the kennel. No explanation scribbled on a post-it. Just silence and an empty dog bed. By noon Helen had packed every room they touched. Kitchen drawers with mismatched mugs, receipts crammed into junk baskets, a broken tablet charger, an unopened electric bill with Kyle's name on it. Each box was labeled with the date and contents. Carla had been very clear. Inventory everything. Document, photograph, store the items in a separate secure space. Do not throw anything out, yet. So Helen opened the garage. The air inside was cool, and smelled faintly of lawn fertilizer and winter dust. She cleared a corner, stacked the boxes with military precision, and clicked a brand new padlock around the rolling door handle. The key slid into her pocket beside Muffin's treat pouch. The garage door closed with finality. Behind her, the front door rattled violently, followed by fists. "You can't just erase us," Brianna screamed through the wood, her voice cracking. "You don't get to pretend we were never here." Helen didn't rush. She walked to the door, looked through the peephole. Brianna's eyes were wild, her fists balled, cheeks blotchy from cold and fury. Helen unlocked the deadbolt, but kept the chain engaged. "You erased Muffin," she said evenly. "That was the last thing you erased." Then she shut the door and relocked it. Muffin had taken up position in the hallway, as if keeping watch. Her ears flicked forward, her body curled beside one particular box. "Brianna, bedroom, 2 of 3, and laid her chin on it, as if she knew the scent. Helen knelt beside her and stroked her soft fur. "That's not home, baby," she whispered. "It's just exit baggage." Her phone buzzed on the counter. A name lit the screen. Maya. Helen hesitated, then answered. "Hi, honey." Maya's voice was cautious. "Hey, Nana. I heard something weird from Aunt Jan. Is everything okay?" Helen walked to the kitchen window, watching the long shadows stretch across the frost-stained lawn. "It's been a strange season," she said. But the forecast's finally clearing. What does that mean? It means I've been taken for a ride, and now I'm driving again. There was a long pause. Is this about Brianna? Helen closed her eyes. It's about boundaries, sweetheart, and finally enforcing them. Maya exhaled. You sound different. I feel different. I'm coming to see you, Maya said. I should have come sooner. Helen smiled softly, letting the warmth of it sit behind her ribs. Bring coffee. Real coffee. Done. They hung up, and Helen glanced down at Muffin, still guarding the box like a sentinel. Then came the next buzz. An email. From Carla Pena. Subject: court date confirmed. Helen opened it. Eviction hearing is officially on the docket for Thursday. Sheriff's office will serve them tomorrow morning. Let's finish this right. Helen stared at the message for a long moment, then hit reply. I'll be ready. The courthouse smelled like cold marble and old paper. Helen stood in front of the metal detector, waiting for the deputy to finish scanning her bag. Her blazer, a navy blue one she hadn't worn since David's memorial, was perfectly pressed. Her hair, softly curled, framed her face like armor. In one hand she held a worn leather folder. Inside, timelines, receipts, notarized statements, photographs, certified ownership records, everything that mattered. She didn't shake. In courtroom 2B, the fluorescent lights were too bright, and the chairs too stiff, but Helen moved like she belonged there. Carla was already seated at the front table, her presence composed and unreadable. She stood when Helen approached, took the folder from her, and gave a nod that carried the full weight of quiet confidence. Today's cleanup, Carla said simply. Brianna and Kyle were seated across the aisle, both wearing clothes too formal for who they were. Kyle had swapped his hoodie for an oversized blazer and cheap tie. Brianna wore something that might have passed for respectful, if it weren't so obviously borrowed. They didn't look at Helen, but they glanced toward the judge's bench nervously, whispering behind a stack of disorganized papers. The bailiff called the case. All parties for Granger versus Lawson and Thorne, step forward. Helen sat beside Carla. The clerk handed the judge a thick file, Carla's pre-submitted packet. Your Honor. Carla began smoothly. We are filing for immediate eviction under Idaho Code 6303. My client, Mrs. Helen Granger, is the sole legal owner of the property in question. The defendants have no tenancy agreement, have paid no rent, and have submitted forged documents in an attempt to establish false residency. The judge, a gray-haired woman with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen it all, flipped through the documents without expression. Continue. Carla laid out the case in clean, deliberate lines. The fraudulent lease, the redirected mail, the unauthorized business registration, the notarized statement detailing coercion, property misuse, and the attempted surrender of a registered service animal without consent. Kyle crossed and uncrossed his legs. Brianna clenched her jaw so tightly her temple twitched. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, did you sign a rental agreement with Mrs. Granger directly? Kyle opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I thought. Did she give you written permission to reside in her home? She didn't say no. Not how the law works, the judge replied dryly. Brianna, Your Honor, this was a family arrangement. She let us stay there. Now she's punishing us because she doesn't like our choices. Carla didn't flinch. Your Honor, if I may. This isn't about choices. This is about calculated manipulation. You'll find Exhibit C. Text messages between Miss Lawson and a third party referencing plans to take the house over and lock it in by spring. She intended this. Brianna's face went pale. The judge reviewed the evidence. Her pen scratched against paper in measured strokes. Then she looked up. Neither of you had a legal right to occupy this home, and your attempts to retroactively manufacture one are both transparent and offensive. Kyle's foot bounced uncontrollably beneath the table. Eviction is granted, the judge continued. Immediate removal, with sheriff's office support authorized. You have 24 hours to vacate. Enforcement begins after that. She banged the gavel once. The sound cracked through the room like a starting gun. Outside, sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. Helen stood still for a moment, letting the fresh air wrap around her like a second coat. Muffin's collar tag jingled faintly in her memory. Carla stepped beside her. "How do you feel?" Helen exhaled. "Less heavy." Carla smiled. "You carried it well." Helen nodded, the moment sinking in slowly, quietly. Her hands were still, her spine straight. No victory dance, just the clean silence of something finally set down. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Local 208, she answered. "Mrs. Granger," a warm voice said. "I'm a reporter with the Boise Beacon. Your dog's shelter story came through the wire. Would you be open to talking?" "There's a lot of interest." Helen blinked. "The dog story, yes ma'am. The paper called it Rescue and Redemption. Yours, not just hers." The walls were a dull gray, chipped in the corners, scuffed where furniture had once scraped. Helen stood in the doorway of the guest room, holding a can of lemon cream paint in one hand and a brush in the other. Morning light stretched across the floor, catching on dust motes that danced like echoes. She could still see the ghosts of them here. Brianna's laundry piles on the chair. Kyle's scuffed sneakers kicked under the bed. Noise used to linger here like smoke. Arguments muffled behind closed doors. Passive-aggressive laughter that never quite felt real. But now, the room was hollow. Hollow and hers. Helen dipped the brush, swept the first stroke across the wall. The yellow went on boldly, bright and unapologetic. It was the color of spring mornings and fresh starts. Muffin lay curled in the hallway, chin resting on her paws, watching. Her tail wagged each time Helen passed. It took hours. By the time she was done, her arm ached and her back protested, but the room gleamed. The paint was still drying when she pulled crisp white linens onto the bed, ironed and lavender-scented, and fluffed the pillows into symmetry. She unboxed the old blue reading lamp from the attic, rewired it with Trish's help, and set it on the corner table beside a small vase of silk daisies. Together she and Trish assembled the narrow bookshelf Helen had ordered online. The wood was light ash, smooth and clean, and Helen filled the shelves with paperbacks she'd loved but hadn't touched in years. Steinbeck, Welty, Baldwin, stories with marrow. Trish stood back, hands on hips. "It looks like it remembers itself." Helen smiled faintly. "This room deserves better sound than shouting." She turned to open the closet and found a small box pushed deep in the corner, tucked behind an old suitcase. When she opened it, her breath caught. Photo album, 3 of them, worn leather covers, pages thick with plastic sleeves. She carried them to the bed, sat down and opened the first one. There she was, Brianna, age 8, grinning wide with frosting on her chin at a birthday party Helen barely remembered hosting. Another photo, Brianna and Maya in matching pajamas, Muffin barely a puppy, nestled between them on the couch. Helen didn't cry, but her hand lingered on one page longer than the rest before she gently slid that album aside and closed the others. She kept 2. The third she quietly slid into the hallway donation box without a word. Muffin padded into the room, sniffed once, and made a small satisfied grunt before curling into the triangle of sunlight that fell across the hardwood. She closed her eyes, belly full, heart steady. Helen stood in the doorway, arms folded, breathing in the faint scent of paint, old books and lemon oil. No sound but the low purr of the central heating and the slow rhythm of Muffin's breathing. Then came the doorbell. Not a frantic knock, not a fist or demand, just 2 soft chimes. Helen walked to the front door, opened it. Maya stood there, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a bouquet of fresh tulips and a small paper bag. "Hi," she said quietly. Helen's hand went to the doorframe, but her shoulders didn't tighten this time. Maya smiled nervously. "I brought flowers and cookies from that bakery on 8th you like." Helen stepped aside. "Come in." Maya entered slowly, eyes scanning the house. It was the first time she'd seen it since everything began. "Is now a good time?" Maya asked. Helen nodded, gesturing to the kitchen. But Maya didn't move. Instead, she looked Helen in the eye and asked, her voice almost a whisper, "Can we talk about what really happened?" The kettle hissed gently, steam curling upward like a ribbon unraveling in the quiet. Helen poured 2 cups of chamomile and set them on the table. No cream, just a sliver of lemon in each, the way Maya had liked it since she was 13. Maya sat across from her, jacket still zipped halfway, eyes scanning the room like it was a puzzle she hadn't studied in years. Her hands fidgeted with the tulip stems she'd set in a glass, now awkwardly placed between the sugar jar and a bowl of apples. Neither spoke right away. Helen took the first sip. "You asked what happened." Maya nodded. "I want to hear it. All of it. If you're okay telling me." Helen glanced out the kitchen window. The wind had settled. The leaves in the maple out front barely stirred. She took a long breath, and when she began to speak, her voice didn't tremble. "It started small," she said. "Groceries going missing. Mail redirected. Brianna using my address for things without asking. At first, I told myself it was just the adjustment, letting them stay here, giving them space during a hard year." Maya said nothing, but leaned forward, her cup untouched. Helen continued. "Then Muffin started going hungry. My savings thinned. Kyle brought in friends I didn't know. Brianna stopped knocking on my bedroom door. They took the house inch by inch until I barely recognized the floor beneath me." She paused. "But the worst was the day I woke up and Muffin was gone." Maya flinched at that. Her eyes shone. "I didn't know. I mean, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't ask." "I noticed that too," Helen said gently. Silence settled between them again, but this time it didn't sting. It breathed. Maya looked around. "The house feels different now. Warmer, it's clean," Helen said. "Not just the rooms. The air, too. The weight's gone." They sat like that for a while, the quiet stretching soft between words. Eventually Helen stood and walked to a cabinet she hadn't opened in months. She pulled out an old photo box, the corners worn, the lid loose. "I kept a few," she said. "The rest I let go." Maya opened the box with care. Inside were snapshots across decades, children on bikes, Christmas trees too big for the room, a younger Helen holding a cake with mismatched candles. She smiled at one. Maya and Brianna wearing matching Minnie Mouse shirts. Muffin's oversized puppy head resting in Maya's lap. "She always liked you better," Helen said, half a smile lifting her cheek. "She was smart," Maya replied softly. They flipped through a few more. Maya ran her finger over the glossy surface of one, then set it aside. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not for what they did, but for not asking why you went quiet. I should have heard the silence louder." Helen reached across the table and placed her hand gently over Maya's. "Don't inherit silence. Break it when you need to." Maya's eyes filled again, and this time she didn't blink them away. She stood, rounded the table, and hugged her grandmother. It wasn't a polite embrace. It was long, grounding, necessary. Muffin, who had been watching from the hallway, trotted over and leaned her small body into Maya's shin. "She remembers," Helen murmured. "Even if we forget sometimes." Maya knelt, rubbing behind Muffin's ears. The old dog pressed into her hand, a soft, unspoken forgiveness in her nuzzle. Helen's phone buzzed on the counter. New email. Carla Pena subject. Trust revision finalized. Helen opened it, scanned the message, then exhaled slowly. "One name now inherits the house. Yours to approve." She looked at Maya, who was still petting Muffin, unaware. The pen hovered above the line. Helen stared at the parchment-colored document, laid neatly on the dining room table. The legal language was dense, but Carla had already walked her through it twice. Helen knew exactly what it said, what it meant. This time she wouldn't sign out of obligation. This time it would mean something. Maya stood across from her, quiet, hands clasped in front of her. Her eyes flicked between Helen and the line, where her name was now printed in clean black ink. Maya Granger, sole beneficiary, and successor trustee. Helen signed, one stroke, deliberate. Then another, final. Carla slid the paper back toward herself, with the same practiced grace of a woman who had handled hundreds of these. Still, her tone held a gravity that gave the moment weight. "It's filed with the county. There's a copy in the safe, one in my office, and one for Maya's records. This version supersedes any previous. Irrevocable, with a non-contest clause. Helen leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. Good. Maya's voice was soft. You're really doing this. Helen met her eyes. I've done it. But what if they try something? Carla didn't look up from the folder she was organizing. They won't. This language is ironclad. Any challenge from a disinherited party forfeits their standing and nullifies their claim. Maya blinked. You added that. I insisted on it, Helen said. The room felt different now, lighter but not hollow. The way a space feels after something heavy has been carried out, piece by piece, and replaced with intention. Muffin padded into the room just then, tags jingling. She stopped beside Helen's chair and looked up, tail swaying slightly. Helen reached down and unfastened the old, worn nylon collar. She pulled a new one from the drawer, a deep red leather with a gold nameplate she'd had engraved the day before. She clipped it around Muffin's neck with care. The tag glinted under the dining light. Home. Maya knelt beside Muffin and ran a finger across the engraving. That's beautiful. She's earned it, Helen said. There was a knock and then the door opened without ceremony. Trish stepped inside with a small tote and a bottle of chilled champagne poking from the top. Am I too early to toast justice? Helen smiled. You're right on time. Trish pulled out 4 paper cups, poured the bubbly with casual ceremony and handed them out. Even Muffin got a little saucer of whipped cream Trish had picked up at the cafe. To freedom, Carla said. To family, Maya added quietly. Helen lifted her cup. To rewriting what should have been written right the first time. They drank. The afternoon sun dipped lower, spreading warmth through the windows. For the first time in years, Helen didn't feel like she was preserving something fragile. She felt like she was building forward. Carla slipped her tablet back into her bag. By the way, I got a call earlier from the journalist who ran Muffin's story. They're doing a follow-up piece, this time on elder rights, power dynamics, housing protections. They asked if you'd speak. Just a short interview. Helen tilted her head. About what happened. About how you took it back. Maya looked over, startled. Would you actually do it? Helen didn't answer right away. She glanced out the window at her front yard, the one Kyle used to park on like it was his own. At the porch where Brimayana once shouted at her like she was a burden. At the garden that was hers again. Finally, she didn't feel invisible anymore. She felt seen. The reporter was young, barely older than Brimayana, with a notepad balanced on her knee and a voice that softened each time Helen hesitated. They sat in Helen's living room, where the sun now poured in unobstructed, and the silence wasn't heavy, but whole. I've read through the filings, the reporter said, tapping the pad, and I've spoken with Carla. But what I really want to understand is, why now? Why not let it go quietly? Helen sipped her tea, the steam curling against her face. Because I already did quiet, and they mistook it for consent. Outside, Muffin barked once from the porch, a short yip at a squirrel rustling through the bird bath. Helen smiled and nodded toward the door. She guards now, just in case someone else tries to walk in uninvited. The reporter chuckled. May I quote that? Helen tilted her head. If you quote me right. The article ran 3 days later, front page of the Sunday Boise Beacon. Dog dumped, grandma reclaims life, and house underneath was a photo of Helen and her front steps, Muffin in her lap, both of them staring straight into the lens, like they had nothing left to prove. The phone started ringing before noon. Friends from church, old coworkers, even a neighbor down the street, Helen barely knew, left a note on her porch. You reminded me, it's never too late to draw a line. Thank you. Carla forwarded an email from a local rescue group. They were donating a year's worth of food for Muffin, along with monthly grooming and checkups. We've seen too many cases like yours. They wrote. This one had a win. That matters. Maya texted screenshots of the comment section. Hundreds of hearts, dozens of messages. One stuck out. My grandmother is my role model. And now everyone knows why. Helen reread that line twice before she put the phone down. Her hands were steady. Not warm. Not cold, just certain. But the part that surprised her most came in an envelope. A thick one. No return address. Inside was a formal letter from the Dean of Community Outreach at Boise State University. They'd read the story, verified the case, and wanted to invite Helen to speak at an upcoming seminar on elder rights and intergenerational housing boundaries. There was even a stipend offered in appreciation for your time, wisdom, and example. Helen stared at the letter for a long moment before placing it in the center of her kitchen table. She ran her fingers along the edge, the texture of opportunity both strange and strangely familiar. You really going to do it? Trish asked when she stopped by later that afternoon, arms full of oranges and a bag of dog treats. Helen didn't answer right away. She opened a drawer, pulled out a small calendar she hadn't looked at in months. It was a simple thing, a freebie from the pharmacy, the kind with a plastic cover and red ink bleeding through the paper. She flipped through the pages, her finger pausing on one date in particular, circled in ink written in her own hand months ago before everything had cracked open. Gotcha Day, Muffin, March 12th. It was 5 days away, a celebration she never expected to reach. And yet, here they were, both of them still standing. Helen looked up, eyes bright. Maybe I will. Trish placed a hand on her shoulder. You've turned this whole mess into something bigger than them. You know that, right? Helen gave a small smile. I didn't do it to be seen. I did it to stop being erased. Muffin barked again from the yard, this time sharp and joyful. Helen reached for a pen, flipped the calendar to the next page, and began to write something beneath that red circle. But before she finished, her phone buzzed again. New text, Maya, want me to bring cake for Muffin's party. Helen looked at the calendar once more, the red circle glowing in the late afternoon light. The leash rested lightly in Helen's palm, but the feeling tethered her more than ever. Each gentle tug from Muffin reminded her this walk wasn't about exercise. It was about presence, about peace. The sidewalk still held patches of frost where the sun hadn't yet touched. Her boots made soft scuffs over leaves flattened from last week's rain. Helen walked slow, letting Muffin set the pace. The old dog sniffed curbs, paused to watch a squirrel dart across a driveway, then trotted forward again with quiet purpose. The park came into view, framed by maples just beginning to bud. A couple of kids chased each other near the swings, and somewhere to her right, someone played faint acoustic guitar. Helen hadn't walked this far in months. She and Muffin followed the winding path to the bench near the duck pond, but it was already occupied. A woman mid-60s, maybe younger, maybe older, from the way sadness pulls a face down, sat with her hands in her lap, a leash dangling from one and no dog at the end. Her face was blotched, eyes red. She didn't look up until Helen was almost past. Then their eyes met. Helen paused. I'm sorry, she said gently, motioning to the empty seat. Mind if we sit? The woman blinked, like she was waking from somewhere far off. She nodded. Helen lowered herself slowly, knees stiff, and Muffin laid at her feet without being told. I just left her, the woman whispered, as if confessing something, at the shelter up on Fairview. She's 10. Arthritis. I couldn't keep up. My landlord raised the rent. I couldn't. Her voice cracked. She covered her mouth. Helen didn't say anything right away. She looked out at the pond where a duck paddled alone near the reeds. They tried to throw mine away too, she said finally. Told me she was better off. I found her 2 shelters later. The woman looked over, surprised. You got her back? Helen nodded. They underestimated what I'd walk through to find her. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small white card, printed simply, nothing flashy. Carla Pena, Elder Legal Aid, Property and Tenancy Law. She's the reason I got to walk home with Muffin, Helen said. And why I still get to walk at all. The woman took the card like it was something fragile. She turned it over in her fingers. She really helped. She didn't rescue me. She reminded me I didn't need to stay trapped. The woman's eyes filled again, but she smiled this time. Thank you. Muffin lifted her head then and pressed it lightly against the woman's calf. Helen watched the moment unfold. The slow lean of dog to stranger. The shared grief understood without a word. Muffin stayed there, tail thumping once, then going still. She knows, Helen said. They always know. The sun dipped lower in the sky, turning the pond golden. Wind whispered through the trees, tugging softly at Helen's scarf. She stood stretching gently, and the woman rose too. Helen clipped Muffin's leash, and gave the woman a parting nod. Whatever you decide next, make sure your story's the one being told. They walked slowly back through the neighborhood, the light now stretching long across lawns and driveways. Helen passed familiar houses, some with new owners, some still the same. It all felt strangely intact, as if the battle had come and gone, and now the land remembered peace again. Near her porch, Muffin stopped and looked up. Helen smiled, crouched and rubbed behind her ears. "Still here," she whispered. "Still mine." Her phone buzzed just as she reached the front door. "Maya want me to bring cake for Muffin's party." Helen laughed aloud. Light, free, unexpected. She tapped out a reply. The folder was heavier than Helen remembered. It was the last one. The red manila file marked in pencil. "Keep for now." The edges were worn, corners bent from being handled and debated, opened and reopened. She placed it gently on the kitchen table and sat with it for a moment, fingers resting on the cover, eyes soft but unsentimental. Then she opened it. Inside, 3 remaining copies of the fabricated lease agreement, a few receipts Brianna had doctored, a utilities summary Kyle had rewritten to make it look like he'd contributed, notes in the margins in Brianna's handwriting, plans, phone numbers, reminders to reprint legal-looking version. Helen didn't flinch. She stood, walked to the hallway closet, and rolled out the small black shredder she hadn't touched since everything began. Plugged it in. The hum was quiet, steady, familiar. She fed the first page in. The paper caught, sliced into ribbons, fell into the bin with a soft rustle. Then another. And another. She moved with the calm of someone not destroying evidence, but purging poison. When the final page disappeared, she unplugged the shredder and wheeled it back into the closet. She opened the file drawer in her hallway cabinet, took out Carla's final letter, court ruling enclosed, trust finalized, title confirmed, and filed it under a new tab she'd created the day before. Resolved. The house was silent, but not empty. Sunlight spilled through the living room windows and fell across the hardwood floors, catching the grain like gold. The scent of lavender drifted from the candle she'd lit that morning. In the corner, a basket of dog toys sat half-toppled, where Muffin had nosed through it. She took her time, wiping down the kitchen counters, fluffing the couch pillows, setting 2 mugs beside the stove to pre-warm with hot water. At exactly 2:03 p.m., the doorbell rang. Helen opened the door to find Maya balancing a cake box in one hand, a bouquet of daisies in the other, and a notebook tucked under her arm. "Okay," so Maya said, breathless from the cold. "The cake is liver and sweet potato. Don't judge. It's what the lady at the pet bakery swore was a hit. Flowers are yours, not Muffins, and the notebook is for later, in case you feel like writing anything down." Helen stepped aside, her smile soft and full. "You brought the whole party, and then some." Maya grinned. "I figured Muffin deserved it." Inside, they cleared a space on the coffee table, set the cake down, lit a single candle, and called Muffin over. The old terrier sniffed the air, tail wagging slow and steady, ears perked. "Ready?" Maya asked. Helen nodded. They sang Happy Gotcha Day, with the kind of reverence reserved for milestones hard won. No theatrics, no cameras, just 2 voices and a dog that had been lost and found, and now stood whole again. Muffin barked once at the end, as if to say, "I remember too." Helen poured tea, handed Maya her cup, and settled into her chair, the same one Kyle once stained with a pizza box. Now, it smelled of lemon polish and chamomile. They sipped in silence for a moment, the kind that holds gratitude rather than awkwardness. Maya looked around. "It feels full here." Helen exhaled. "It is." The front yard, once rutted with Kyle's tire tracks, was now green with early spring. The porch was swept. The house, clean, her name unchallenged on the deed, and her dog curled beside her chair, was exactly where she belonged. Maya nudged the notebook toward her. If you ever want to tell more of it, for you or someone else. Helen traced the edge of the cover but didn't open it. Maybe tomorrow. They clinked their teacups together gently. Outside, the wind rustled through the maple tree in a hush, like it was finally resting too. Helen looked at Muffin, then at Maya, and smiled. This time, she said, nothing is missing. They took my dog while I slept, and I woke up in every way that mattered.